Sometimes it's the first high stakes decision that some couples make in their relationship, right? All the other decisions that you've made, they've had kind of short-term implications, right? It's like, hey, if this doesn't work out, yes, it's going to be annoying. Yes, it may be inconvenient, but it's not the going to be something that just cripples us financially for years to come. Buying a house is definitely something that has the capability of doing that, right? And so if you do that first, it's going to test your relationship, right? Because you're going to have to see, like, hey, is our relationship mature enough? Is our relationship strong enough to go through the process of purchasing a home? Because I've said, welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into reality. I'm your host, Derek Thorne. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. This week's episode is entitled, What's Love Got to Do with It? Right? And we're going to spend a lot of time talking particularly to couples who are romantically involved but unmarried and considering purchasing a home together. Right. So these are the people who may be unmarried and have plans to at some point. And these are also the people who have no plans of ever getting married. They're completely fine in the arrangement, just being partners or a common law marriage, whatever that may be. We're going to talk about it from both perspectives and key things that you will want to keep in mind if you're planning on getting or purchasing a home with someone that you are not married to. It can definitely be a tricky subject. This is definitely something over the years, depending on your beliefs and principles. It's something that a lot of people have had their own opinion about whether or not it works or whether or not it's the right thing to do, quote unquote. I grew up in the church myself, and you heard all kinds of things about people who are in these types of arrangements. You're all over there, you're shacking up, or you're living in sin. You hear all these different things in regard to people purchasing homes unmarried, or even living together in a rental situation unmarried. We're not really going down that road. That's not the purpose or the intent of this episode today. We're not addressing that. You could do a whole other podcast. You could write a whole book on all the different things about whether that is right or wrong, or what the pros and cons and everything else involved with that. We're not talking about that. We're more so focused on, okay, wherever you stand right now and what you believe, what are some things that you need to know or that you need to take into account, right? Because it's something that a lot of people just rush into, you jump into it, and you think that you got it all figured out, and then you realize very quickly, oh my goodness, I didn't think about this, I didn't think about that. And so I want to take some time to kind of really go through the nuts and bolts of things that I would advise people, and I'm going to do it as if you were my own family or if you were my own close friend. This is the advice that I give people, right? I've helped people in all different types of situations. I've helped unmarried people who got married immediately after they purchased a home. I've helped people who still to this day aren't married and have no intentions or plans of ever getting married. I will help you figure out what's the thing that you need to know when it comes to that home purchase, right? And so let's just kind of break this down and kind of talk a little bit more about it. The way the landscape looks is just as the way that our society operates, the way that inflation has come into account, the way housing unaffordability has become a huge issue. When you look at the way that things are in the U.S. compared to, let's say, the early 70s, the marriage rate has dropped by about 50%. And when you look at the housing unaffordability, right, housing affordability just in general, that is also at an all-time low as well. And so this is not something that's just a growing trend or a current fad. This is something that is going to be around for a while, right? It's here to stay. Whether you like it or not, it's something that we're going to see more and more of, is that people who are together or a couple are going to be looking to purchase homes because, again, they understand that that's one of the best ways for them to have some stability, for them to plant roots, for them to build wealth, and have all the advantages that come with purchasing a home. This is going to be one of the best ways to do that. And it's incredibly difficult right now for people to do that in a single home environment, right? Or a single person or a single income household, is becoming increasingly difficult to make that a reality. And so this notion or this kind of trend that we're seeing of a lot of people purchasing homes unmarried is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. It's something that we're going to see for many years to come. And so I just want to make sure that we always talk and address the things that you all need to remember and need to keep in mind as you're going through that process. And so the first thing I want to address is kind of the people or the group or segment of the unmarried folk who are looking to buy a home, who have plans to get married, right? So let's focus on them first, right? Let's say you are not married yet. You might even be engaged, but let's say whatever your status is, you're not married, but you're looking to purchase a home. And your big question at the moment is, okay, do we need to get married first and then buy the house? Do we buy the house first and then get married? What do you think is best, right? That's a question that we sometimes will get. Again, realtors, we get all kinds of questions, right? We're not just a realtor. In some cases, a lot of times we end up becoming therapists and psychiatrists and a whole bunch of other things whenever we're trying to help people through these different decisions. But one thing that I always tell people is, if you're in that boat as far as like figuring out which thing you need to do first, my general advice is that you have to do it, like I said, what works best for you in your situation, right? And so there's going to be pros and cons regardless of which one you do first. And so let's kind of talk through that and just say like, hey, you have a full and accurate understanding of what works best for you. So let's say you go through the process of buying the house first and then getting married, right? So you go through the process, you buy the house, you buy the property and everything like that. That's great. Okay. The advantages to that is that you got that out of the way. You have a firm place established so that when you do get married, you've already got everything situated and ready to go, and you can just hit the ground running right into your married life, right? So that's one of the biggest advantages to it, is that you've got it out the way, you've got it all set up, as far as like logistically with paperwork and the deed and everything, if you're changing your name, it's not an overly difficult process to change your name on that deed and everything like that. And so those are all things that you can handle and that you can correct, but it's not going to be a earth-shattering difference, right? So that's one of the advantages. One of the disadvantages to purchasing the house before you get married is that you're not often keeping in mind all of the costs that may be associated with that. So when you buy a house, you're buying a massive responsibility, right? All the things that come with home ownership, right? All the bills, all the unexpected surprises, you're placing that right on top of you and your relationship, right? And so sometimes there are relationships that are strong enough to handle that, right? That's a massive decision for both of you to make. And sometimes it's the first high stakes decision that some couples make in their relationship, right? All the other decisions that you've made, they've had kind of short-term implications, right? It's like, hey, if this doesn't work out, yes, it's going to be annoying. Yes, it may be inconvenient, but it's not going to be something that just cripples us financially for years to come. Buying a house is definitely something that has the capability of doing that, right? And so if you do that first, it's going to test your relationship, right? Because you're going to have to see, hey, is our relationship mature enough? Is our relationship strong enough to go through the process of purchasing a home? Because I've said it on this podcast before many times. Buying a house, like the house hunting, like looking at homes and actual closing day, those are the fun parts. But everything else that comes in between that is just a miserable experience that no one would ever want to go through. But you go through it because you want that house and stuff, right? And so again, if you're going to go through that process, that's going to be a real test and a real strain on your relationship before you ever even move into the house or even get into the process of getting married, right? And so sometimes it helps if the marriage itself is the first high stakes decision that you have, and then you use that as the foundation to make all of your other important decisions, right? And so if you buy the house first, you kind of lose that option or that ability to have that high stakes decision that really tests your relationship to come after the fact, right? That's one of the major things that you have to keep in mind, as well as when you buy that house first, again, it's a massive responsibility that you're taking on. And what often happens, or what people usually say to themselves, is like, okay, we'll buy the house and then we'll go and have the nice wedding, the reception and all that stuff too. If you're planning on having a nice traditional wedding with the huge reception and the nice dress and all these different things going on, you need to understand that there's a lot of times where life gets in the way of a lot of those things happening, right? And so now, trust me, I've seen plenty of situations where people bought a house unmarried first, then went on to have a beautiful wedding. I see it happen all the time. But I've also seen some situations where people get married first. Buy the house first, and then they say, hey, we'll get married, but then life happens, right? The roof has a huge leak that causes a huge expense. Their car breaks down. They lose their job. All these different things start to happen now that they have this house responsibility around them, and that marriage starts to get kicked further and further down the road, right? That wedding ceremony gets kicked further and further. And you could do the courthouse wedding just to make it official and stuff like that. But if some people are really dead set on having that kind of fairy tale wedding and all that stuff like that, you may not be able to get that, right? That may get bumped to the side because the house is what's going to take the priority. Those are things that you have to keep in mind. So you have to ask yourself, if that could potentially happen, are you okay with that, right? And if you're not, then you have to ask yourself, okay, we might need to switch these two, right? We might need to put the marriage first, then buy the house. The other thing that you need to understand too as well is that when you go through that process of buying that house first, you lose out on the potential of gifts. Right. We think a lot of times with weddings, you might have registries, you might have different people giving gifts and stuff like that. And if you put the wedding first, you could say, hey, instead of giving to our registry or giving us a bunch of appliances or wedding gifts or things that we may not even use in the future, what do you say you chip in on this down payment, right? That could be a great way that you could do that. And you don't have that advantage if you put the house first. And so those are just some key things to kind of keep in mind if you're in that boat of someone who's trying to figure out, hey, what should we do first, the marriage or the house? I always help people kind of talk through that. Now, switching back to the pros and cons of purchasing a house with someone that you are married to or versus unmarried, we always want to look and say, okay, what are the advantages to purchasing a house or just going ahead with the purchase even though you aren't married? One of the biggest advantages and the main reasons that many people do this is for money, right? If for no other reason, it's usually easier for you to make that purchase when you have multiple incomes or multiple things, right? And so it's like sometimes it's a convenience factor, but a lot of times it's simply like, hey, we can bring our incomes together and be able to make this purchase for this house and be able to build our wealth and build our equity as a unit instead of just continuing to rent and just essentially, for lack of a better word, just throw money away, right? When you're renting, you're not building any type of equity or any type of value in that home. And so that's just money that you're essentially wasting for years, every year that you aren't married to that person and haven't purchased a home. And so one of the advantages to going ahead and pulling the trigger on that is that you get to take advantage of building that equity, having a firm place that you get to call home everywhere that you go, right? The other thing, too, is that the deed is a very important factor into how all of this comes together and how all of this works. You need to understand not just whose name is on the mortgage, but also whose name is on the deed, right? One of the advantages is that if both names are on the mortgage, both of you get the added benefit of having that help your credit score, right? Help your, because you're making those consistent payments every single month. And that's kind of helping your financial situation, right? And your financial health as you're going through the process, right? And so if both of your names on that deed, you both have a right to that home, all of that helps. And so like those are tremendous advantages. And that's definitely a reason why so many people would say, hey, even though we don't have any plans to get married or aren't married just yet, we want to go ahead with this purchase, right? Because there are advantages to kind of helping with that financial strain, with that burden. Now, the disadvantages purchasing it, one of which being is that it is a long time commitment. Even if it's a short relationship or a short decision, the buying a home is a solid decision that can really have long-term ramifications in your financial situation and just your life. It can have all types of different impacts on the way that you are living your life, right? One of which is, let's say you are living with someone that you're not married to, and you guys are renting, right? You just have a lease. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, a rental lease is usually for just a period of 1 year. Right. So if you guys sign a lease and for whatever reason things don't work out or you end up breaking up, that lease is only in place for a year in most cases. And so you can say, hey, even if we broke up the month after we signed that lease, absolute worst case scenario, I'm locked into this for the next 11 months and then I'm free. I can go do what I want. I don't have to worry about this being an issue anymore. If there are other issues or other problems, right, if it does end up being an eviction, that is going to have long-term ramifications. But outside of that, for the most part, like I said, it's not having as nearly a detrimental impact to me as if a mortgage falls through, right? And so if you buy a house with someone that you're not married to and you guys have a mortgage in place, well, then now we've got a whole other thing that we need to factor in, right? Because it becomes a matter of not just how long is that lease long? Okay, are we going to sell the house? Is one person going to continue living here? How does that all situate? How does that work out? And then when you go to sell that home, are you going to be able to make a profit, right? If you turn around and have to sell it quickly, right? If you just bought that house and immediately a month later you break up or a year later you break up, you can always turn around and sell that house. But more times than not, at that point, when you try to turn around that quickly, you're going to be selling at a loss, right? Because there's going to be fees associated with it. And so even if you sold it for exactly what you bought it for, you're still going to be selling at a loss. And so you have to ask yourself, are you willing to take that hit? And I know no one ever likes to think about a breakup, but you have to ask yourself, seriously, if we purchase this house and close on it, sign the paper, sign the dotted line, our names are recorded on that deed. When we walk out of this door and into that new house, and we break up tomorrow, where does that put me financially, right? How much is this house going to be a strain on just my life and everything else that I have going on? Because it can have tremendous impacts on it, right? If you have issues and fights about a lease, as long as it's getting paid, for the most part, it's not going to have anywhere near as detrimental of an impact because a lease is also not reported to crediting agencies. The only time a lease gets reported to a crediting agency is if you have an eviction on your note. That is something that does get reported. But outside of that, like I said, you don't have any obligation past the point of that lease. With a mortgage, if there are late mortgage payments, like further out than a month, or if there's a foreclosure, that can almost be like dropping an atom bomb on your credit, right? And it can make life so much more difficult, right? If you told me, hey, Derek, you got to pick one, which would you rather have? An eviction on your history, or would you rather have a foreclosure? I'm taking the eviction all day if those are my only two options, right? The foreclosure is they both stay on your credit report for up to about 7 years. But again, that foreclosure can have some serious ramifications that can make it incredibly difficult, not just for your immediate future, but also when you're looking to purchase a house down the road, right? Because I'm sure you'll likely want to purchase at another time. And if you end up in another relationship and want to purchase a home with them, if you got a foreclosure on your record, you're likely not going to be able to contribute at all, if any, to that mortgage as much as you would like to, if you're still trying to get that off your record or get that away from your system. And so all of these things can have long-term impacts, even if it's something that is an item that you never saw coming or an item that you never saw happening. The other thing you also have to understand is that every state has different rules as far as what comes into play when you're looking to sell or unload a property. In the state of North Carolina, we have a saying, it takes one to buy, two to sell, which is basically just a fancy way of saying that if you are the only person on that deed and you are unmarried, you can sell that house and you don't need any permission. You don't need anyone to sign off on it. As long as if you have a mortgage on there, it obviously needs to be enough to pay off the mortgage or else they're going to have to sign off. But outside of that, you're the only person that they need to sign anything. Once you get married, though, regardless of whether or not your spouse is on the deed, they have to then sign off on that house being sold. And so if you bought the house unmarried, and then you eventually got married down the road, and then you broke up, when you go to sell that house, now you're having to make sure that you get their signature as well. And if it was a nasty divorce or a bitter breakup, they're likely to make things a lot more difficult to you as well when you're going through that. If you're unmarried, but both of your names are on the deed, again, both of you are going to need to sign off. And so if both of you are signing the deed for that on that situation, you're going to need to be prepared for that. So you always need to keep that in mind as far as how that all operates, right? Now, if it's just one person on the deed, you're unmarried, and you guys break up, fine. There's no obligation. There's nothing in there. And so, again, that's one of the advantages to people who are unmarried, who are trying to get out of that or try to sell that home. They're not having to worry about that as much. But all of these things are things that are needing to be talked about and discussed. Another thing, too, as well, is a lot of times I see situations where people have agreed to split bills down the middle, right? They say, hey, we will split the rent right down the middle. I'll handle these repairs, you handle those utilities or anything like that. Like we say, hey, we'll handle all these things separately, and you make that agreement very easily right out of the gate. And when they go to purchase a home, they'll say, oh, well, I'll just make this same adjustment once we actually move into the house, right? We'll split the mortgage right down the middle. You handle these utilities. I'll handle the phone. You handle electric. I'll handle water. You handle gas. Like, you try to split everything up as best you can and kind of move forward from there. And people say, hey, that's how we'll handle it. That's how we'll do it all. If that's how you want to do it, great. But you need to keep in mind that you have a lot more responsibility that comes into play when you're going through the process of purchasing or owning a home, right? So you may say, hey, this is exactly how we want our things split up, but what happens when the water heater breaks down? Or what happens when the HVAC needs to be serviced? How are you going to handle all of those things, right? If you are in a relationship, or if you aren't unmarried or whatever, if you have separate accounts, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to it as well. My wife and I, we have a joint account, and it's not her money, it's not my money, it's our money. And if anything happens or anything comes up, we make sure that we pay whatever bill, whatever item comes up out of our money. But if you have an arrangement in place where you have separate accounts and you're paying separate things, you're going to now need to go through the process of having an extremely detailed plan of how to go through all of these different things. And a home just adds so much more complexity to that. Because now it's not just a matter of, okay, what happens with this bill? What happens with that? Now it's like, okay, did we get a quote for this? How are we going to handle this repair? Who's going to put it on this one? I paid this last month, but you didn't pay that one. It's a whole other issue of fights that can come in. And we've seen so many times where those fights turn ugly, turn into breakups, cause stress. And now, instead of just being able to part and go your separate ways, you've got this house pulling you back together, right? And so all of these things are things that you guys need to consider or take in mind, whatever. But I always want to make sure that people have a firm understanding of where they are, what things are at risk when you're trying to go through the process of purchasing. Whether you're married or unmarried, buying a house is a stressful situation and a stressful time. And you want to make sure that you have a thorough understanding of how all this works before you get into that decision, right? And so I hope that that's helpful for you. I'm always here to help you talk through that a little bit more and help you determine what works best for your situation. But hoping that you all have a wonderful week and an awesome time. I'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.